Cyan couldn't help but suspect that Ashel or Lunel had been the ones responsible for giving it to her. Following the incident, they were hailed as heroes of the Empire, reaping the rewards of their actions. But beneath the surface, not everything was as it seemed. Karam turned to Cyan with a grave expression, seeking clarity. Are you saying that Ashel and Lunel orchestrated the entire thing just to benefit themselves? I can't believe they'd sacrifice their own people for personal gain. Her voice dripped with disbelief. Humans are worse than demons. Cyan's response was dark and unsettling. What they've done pales in comparison to what they'll do in the future. A shadow passed over his face as he recalled his past life, where he had played a part in far worse atrocities, bloodier massacres. He couldn't shake the feeling that, in some ways, he was no better than them. Rising to his feet, his decision was made. Noticing his movement, Karam raised a brow. Are we leaving? She asked. Cyan nodded. Yes, it's time. Nana must be waiting. The palace knights can handle the rest. But Karam quickly interrupted, her eyes narrowing as she remembered something. Wait, the princess's necklace. There's something off about it. Cyan turned to her, curious. What do you mean? Karam's voice dropped as she replied, Emily. There's something strange about her scent, it's similar to the day's stone. I noticed it earlier. Cyan's expression darkened, a grim understanding dawning on him. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, Nana had her eyes fixed on Emily, her pupils dilating. You smell delicious, she growled, still lost in her frenzied state. Brian, standing protectively between the two, tried to calm Nana down. Emily, terrified, clung to him, her voice quivering. I'm not tasty. I swear. Brian was perplexed, watching Nana closely. Something was off, Nana was behaving like a predator, solely focused on Emily. His thoughts raced. He needed to stop her, but hurting her wasn't an option. Nana, growing impatient, finally lunged. Emily, trembling with fear, ducked behind Brian, who was rooted to the spot. He couldn't bring himself to strike Nana, his heart torn between the two. He resolved to shield Emily with his own body, bracing for the impact. But in a flash, Cyan appeared, positioning himself between them. Nana's attack struck his back with alarming force, but he didn't flinch. Both Brian and Emily were stunned by his sudden arrival, their eyes wide with shock. Behind them, Karam moved swiftly. She reached toward Emily and snatched something, a necktie that had once belonged to the young master, Ashel. Emily gasped, panicking as Karam tossed it to the ground and crushed it underfoot. What are you doing? Emily cried out. Karam paid her no mind. Turning to Nana, she spoke in a firm, commanding voice. Nana, snap out of it. Your papa is here. The word papa seemed to pierce through Nana's frenzy. Slowly, the feral gleam in her eyes faded. The mention of her father brought her back to her senses, grounding her in reality once more. At that moment, Nana blinked in confusion as she looked around, finally realizing what had happened. Her eyes welled up with tears. Did I hurt you? She asked, her voice breaking. Cyan, with a reassuring smile despite the sweat on his brow, stood beside her. It's all right, he said gently. It doesn't hurt at all. He brushed off her concerns, soothing her with kind words. You didn't mean it, Nana. You didn't do anything wrong. Overcome with guilt, Nana collapsed to her knees, sobbing. Brian watched anxiously, his eyes darting between her and Cyan, concerned for the young master's well-being. Sensing the emotional weight of the moment, Cyan suggested, let's move to another room. This place is a mess. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to Lunel, who stood at a distance, clearly irritated. His brow furrowed in confusion. The palace should have been swarming with monsters, yet the silence was unnerving, as if the beasts had never been there. The king noticed the oddity as well, casting a suspicious glance around. Lunel, attempting to mask his frustration, responded, It's fortunate the threat has been dealt with. Ashel wasn't convinced, his jaw tightening in concealed anger. Just then, they were interrupted by a voice calling out, Father. Erin ran towards the king, throwing her arms around him. Ashel's teeth clenched in silent fury, but he hid his emotions as best he could. The king, relieved to see his daughter safe, hugged her tightly. Lunel approached them, his face carefully neutral. Are you hurt anywhere? He asked, his voice deceptively gentle. Erin shook her head, explaining, I'm all right thanks to the two people who helped me. Lunel's lips curved into a faint smile. Good. I'm glad you're safe. Yet his words didn't match the cold look in his eyes. Erin felt uneasy but still responded politely, I'm glad you're not hurt either. She had many questions for Lunel and Ashel but chose to focus on more pressing matters for now. Just then, Alice stepped forward, bowing slightly. Your Majesty, she greeted the king. The king turned to her, his expression softening with gratitude. Thank you for protecting my youngest daughter, he said warmly. I will reward you handsomely. Erin, meanwhile, noticed Lunel and Ashel whispering to each other on the side. Her curiosity piqued, she strained to catch snippets of their conversation. Before she could gather anything useful, Lunel's face twisted into a malicious grin. Without warning, he drew his sword, pointing it directly at Lunav. A hush fell over the room as Lunel's voice rang out. I know who's behind this entire incident. He paused dramatically, his eyes sweeping the stunned crowd before settling on Lunav. She is the granddaughter of the Garam Mage Association president. Gasps of shock and disbelief filled the air, all eyes now on Lunav as the accusations hung heavily over the room. Lunel swiftly arrested Lunav, much to the shock of those around him. Alice watched in confusion, struggling to understand what Lunel was trying to accomplish. His actions seemed erratic, almost as if he was testing everyone's reactions. The king, visibly displeased, reprimanded Lunel, warning him that he was crossing a dangerous line. Lower your sword, the king commanded sternly. Erin also spoke up in defense of Lunav, explaining how she had saved numerous lives alongside her during the chaos. But Lunel was quick to dismiss her words. It's all a deception, he countered, his voice dripping with suspicion. The Garam kingdom has long been waiting for the perfect moment to strike the Ushav Empire. He went on to claim that Garam's true goal was assassination, aiming to plunge the empire into turmoil. Lunav, remaining composed despite the gravity of the accusation, replied calmly, You speak of conspiracy as if you have proof, Lunel. At this point, Ashel stepped forward, supporting Lunel's claim by stating that they had detected a suspicious aura of mana near the location where Lunav had been staying. The king, now more uncertain, turned to Lunav. Is this true? Erin, alarmed, tried to intervene, but the king silenced her with a raised hand, warning Lunav to choose her words carefully. Seizing the opportunity, Lunel assured the king that he had invited the delegation from Garam in good faith, but had been cautious all along. With enough time, he promised, I will find the evidence we need. After a tense moment, the king reluctantly agreed, and Lunav, along with her group from the Garam Mage Association, was placed under arrest for further investigation. As she was led away, Lunav couldn't help but wonder if she had fallen into a trap, one perhaps even orchestrated by her own grandfather. Meanwhile, in the streets, funerals were being held for those lost during the massacre, including Marquis Drenian, the Empress's younger brother. Despite Cyan's efforts, which had saved far more lives than in his past life, the tragic event still came to be known as the Banquet of Blood. Later, we find Cyan in a quiet room, his injuries being tended to by Alice. He protested lightly, You don't need to do this, Alice. But Alice, determined, insisted on helping her brother. I'm your sister. Of course, I'm going to take care of you. Her voice softened as she continued, It was dangerous. I'm so relieved you managed to get away. She paused, her thoughts lingering on the mysterious figure. If it weren't for that masked person, I wouldn't be here either. Intrigued and unable to shake the memory of their savior, Alice quietly wondered who the masked man truly was. As Alice continued tending to Cyan, she suddenly noticed something. She paused, her eyes narrowing in realization, which made Cyan tense up. But to his surprise, her next comment wasn't about his behavior but his physique. You've gotten stronger, she said, her voice playful. And all these scars? You've been training hard, haven't you? Cyan, trying to brush it off, responded casually, Of course. Alice, amused by his attempt to play it cool, teased, Are you embarrassed now? Can I feel your muscles? She reached out playfully, but Cyan immediately backed away, warning her, Stop making fun of me. Before their banter could continue, the door opened, and Ashel entered the room with a knowing smirk. You two are still as close as ever, he said, sounding almost envious. Makes me a little jealous. He turned his attention to Cyan. Are you fully recovered? Cyan's demeanor shifted instantly, his expression growing cold and guarded. Yes, he answered stiffly, his eyes narrowing slightly as he gauged Ashel's intentions. Alice, noticing the sudden tension, wondered if her brother had also realized that Ashel wasn't as harmless as he appeared. Ashel then mentioned why he had come, shifting the topic to the ongoing investigation. He revealed that they had found a bracelet in Lunav's room, embedded with a day's stone. Lunav claimed it had been a gift, which piqued Cyan's curiosity. So, whoever gave her that bracelet is now a suspect, Cyan remarked, his mind working through the implications. Ashel gave him a sly smile. Exactly. You're sharp. He leaned in slightly, his tone more serious. Did you happen to receive anything unusual from anyone at the banquet, Cyan? No, Cyan answered firmly, his guard still up. He then countered, Do you know who gave the bracelet to Lunav? Ashel explained that there had been a merchant at the palace, but that merchant had since been found dead. Now, he was tracking down anyone connected to him. Ashel's expression darkened as he repeated his question, "Are you sure no one gave you anything that day?" It was then that Cyan began to piece things together. This wasn't a simple investigation. Ashel was looking for a scapegoat. His questions weren't genuine, but a subtle way of casting suspicion elsewhere. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, a woman hummed quietly to herself, completely at ease despite the chaos that had unfolded earlier. This woman was Emily, and as she sat, she felt the presence of an armed man approaching her. Her instincts kicked in, sensing danger. At that exact moment, Cyan's eyes widened. He felt a sudden jolt of awareness. He realized that Emily was in grave danger. Before Ashel could get a response, Cyan suddenly complained about a throbbing pain in his head. Wasting no time, Cyan skillfully played the part, apologizing to his brother and explaining that he still wasn't fully recovered. Alice, always quick to believe anything Cyan said, especially concerning his health, immediately stepped in to support him. Turning to Ashel, she explained that Cyan had lost a significant amount of blood during his ordeal and that the doctor insisted he needed more rest. Ashel, caught off guard by the situation, wasn't expecting this explanation but found Cyan's performance convincing enough. He nodded in agreement, suggesting Cyan should get the rest he needed. Just as Ashel was about to depart, Cyan's voice stopped him in his tracks. Cyan, maintaining his act, claimed he didn't recall receiving anything from anyone. Even if someone had tried, he doubted they would have survived the chaos of that night. Ashel's face lit up with satisfaction, his suspicions seemingly laid to rest. He thanked Cyan for the clarification, reasoning that the monsters likely took care of anyone who might have tried to interfere. Ashel felt relieved, thinking there was no one left to eliminate. However, there was a flicker of disappointment within him. Deep down, Ashel had been hoping the chaos during the banquet would be his opportunity to dispose of Cyan once and for all. This fleeting moment of malice didn't go unnoticed by Cyan, who sensed the faint bloodlust. Alice, always attentive to her brother, noticed Cyan's subtle change in expression. Worried, she called out to him and, without warning, playfully slapped him on the shoulder, urging him with a mix of affection and concern to lie down and rest. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the palace, the sound of blood dripping echoed in the dim light. A maid, trembling with fear, slowly backed away from a figure looming over her. Her voice quivered as she asked why this was happening, her eyes wide with desperation. She insisted she had done exactly as instructed, handing Princess Erin the cursed necklace as planned. With a sword hovering dangerously close to her throat, the maid pleaded for her life, promising that Erin would never uncover the truth about the necklace's purpose. But the mysterious figure simply gazed at her coldly, stating that while she had indeed played her part, but his role was not yet complete. And, as a part of that role, he regretfully had to carry out the grim task before him. The mysterious figure was none other than Boris, the same man our Cyan had clashed with earlier in the chapter. As Boris stood over the trembling maid, he let out a bitter chuckle, muttering to himself how things had gone awry despite all his careful planning. The frustration was evident in his voice as he remarked how much the situation disgusted him. In an instant, blood splattered across the room, painting the walls red. Boris turned away from the lifeless body of the maid, muttering a cold farewell for her to rest in peace. Just as he was about to leave, Boris paused, remembering something. He muttered under his breath, mentioning a corpse that had been discovered previously, likely referring to the merchant Ashel had mentioned earlier. Boris knew he couldn't afford another oversight. To prevent a repeat of that situation, he retrieved his grimoire, and from its pages emerged a terrifying black creature with countless eyes and razor-sharp fangs. Grinning darkly, Boris ordered the creature to consume the remains. Meanwhile, in a peaceful corner of the palace gardens, Emily was humming a soft tune, unaware of the presence behind her until a voice called her name. Startled, she turned to see Brian approaching with a friendly smile. The looming dread of another assassination attempt evaporated as it became clear that Brian had no such intentions. Instead, he had brought some apples he'd picked up from town. Grateful, Emily immediately took one, biting into it with the enthusiasm of Snow White enjoying her first taste of a forbidden fruit. The two of them sat side by side, exchanging casual conversation. Brian commented on how pleasant the weather was, to which Emily responded by asking how much longer they would be staying in this place. Brian relayed the message from their young master, saying, "Until he says otherwise." That left things rather uncertain. A flashback interrupted the peaceful moment. Emily recalled the gift that Cyan had received from Ashel. It was supposed to be a gesture of congratulations for attending his first high society event. However, Cyan saw right through it. He knew there was more to the gift than met the eye. Frustrated, he burned the gift into his dark fire, watching as the flames consumed it. Emily, alarmed by his actions, quickly voiced her concern, but Cyan silenced her with a stern look. He told her that both the palace and the Vert estate were no longer safe. She would need to remain hidden until he gave the word that it was safe to return. The weight of his words left no room for argument, and Emily could only nod, understanding that the danger was far from over. While Brian was busy assisting Nana, he suddenly heard Cyan calling for him. Cyan, with his usual calm demeanor, entrusted Brian with a crucial task, to protect Emily, as Cyan had some matters to attend to. Without hesitation, Brian agreed, assuring Cyan that he could handle it. Before departing, Cyan gently patted Nana's head and told Brian to watch over her too. Smiling warmly at Nana, Cyan reassured her that his absence would be brief, and gently reminded her not to cry. Now, in the present timeline, Brian reflected on that moment. He had never seen his master wear such a serious expression, and he felt an overwhelming sense of duty to support him this time. Emily's voice pulled him from his thoughts as she asked about Nana's condition. Brian explained that Nana had struggled for a few days, but he believed she was doing better now. Emily then remarked how much had happened while she was away, expressing surprise that the girl she once thought was a simple maid was, in fact, a draconic human. Determined, she added that she would do everything she could to help from now on. Brian glanced at her, agreeing that he had been thinking the same thing. The two seemed to mirror each other more and more lately. A brief flashback played in Brian's mind, a memory of Emily holding onto his arm. His cheeks flushed red as he recalled the moment, realizing with embarrassment that the thought still made him nervous. He couldn't help but think, Brian, you're in trouble, but deep down, he knew that he cared for Emily. Her words of encouragement about doing their best for their young master only made him blush harder, yet they also filled him with reassurance, bringing a wide smile to his face. Meanwhile, in another part of the palace, tension was brewing. Luenel, furious and unable to contain his frustration, was questioning his father's decision. He protested angrily about letting all the suspects go, despite having clear evidence against them. The Emperor, his voice stern and unyielding, warned his son, "Watch your mouth, Luenel. I've already made my decision." Luenel's anger only intensified. He couldn't comprehend how his father could be so soft in such a crucial moment. Raising his voice, he demanded to know how his father expected to seize control of the continent if he continued to be so lenient. "What about the Garum Kingdom?" Luenel spat in frustration. "Are you so afraid of them?" As soon as those words left Luenel's mouth, a blinding holy beam shot past his face, barely missing him. The Emperor had clearly had enough. With a cold gaze, he reminded his son that he had never aimed to conquer the entire continent. While it may sound ambitious, it was also reckless. The Ushif Empire shares borders not just with the Garum Kingdom, but also with the Demon Realm, Sparnia, and Fruina. Declaring war on Garum would leave them vulnerable, unable to contain the forces of the Demon Realm. If the borders were compromised, monsters would flood into the continent, plunging everyone into chaos. "Even if we somehow managed to claim the entire continent," the Emperor continued, his voice rising with conviction, "it would cost the lives of far too many people. An emperor who willingly sacrifices so many is no ruler, he's a monster." His eyes bored into Luenel as he added sharply, "Are you not even aware of something so basic?" Despite the scolding, Luenel wasn't backing down. He pointed to the evidence they had, determined to prove his point. But before he could elaborate, the Emperor cut him off with a scathing retort. "Are you referring to the Day's Stone?" That one phrase made Luenel freeze, his confidence shaken. How could his father know about that? His own men hadn't finished their investigation yet. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "Your face says it all, Luenel. Ever since you were a child, you never knew when to quit." Luenel broke into a cold sweat, stammering out denials, but the Emperor wasn't having it. "Enough," he snapped. "You fool. How did you turn out like this?" Turning his back on his son, the Emperor delivered the final blow. "Even Eren would make a better ruler than you. I don't want to see your face again." The disdain in his voice was palpable. Luenel trembled with rage. He couldn't believe it, compared to Eren, of all people? Gritting his teeth, he tried to hold back his fury. Eren Severus, he seethed inwardly. That wretched girl ruined everything. In his blind anger, Luenel stormed through the palace halls, his face contorted in rage. Reaching someone's chamber, he ignored the guards' protests, shoving the door open with force. Inside, Leximus, startled by his sudden intrusion, immediately warned him, "Eren needs rest." But before she could finish, Luenel silenced her with a brutal punch, sending her sprawling. Eren, sitting at her bedside, gasped in horror. She called out for Leximus, but before she could rush to her aid, Luenel slammed the table, stopping her. Eren's eyes blazed with anger, but her voice was calm and composed when she asked, "What is the meaning of this, Luenel?" The once fragile and broken princess of the Ushif Empire was no more. Eren had changed, and now, with strength in her voice and fire in her eyes, she confronted her brother head-on. Lunel, clearly rattled by her transformation, stammered out in a trembling voice, "I came here to talk with my precious sister." But Erin wasn't fooled. She stared at him, unflinching, ready to face whatever her brother had come to say. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. We'll see you in the next one.